guys. It's just crazy. I don't have anything on the agenda.
Wow.
You know, usually I have like my stack, and it's feeling really.
You can figure out how to delete that app out of history.
We're good. We're live.
Forever? Can you, I doubt you can even do that.
Live.
I'd have to have somebody an Apple.
Oh no, now you're marked.
Welcome to the Centerville City Council meeting of, well, I've lost track of my days, April 3rd, 2018. The council is now in session. I want to welcome tonight, subbing for Katie is Avalon Comely doing our minutes tonight. We thanks for being here. And I don't know if the council's all met her. She does a lot of minute taking at the Planning Commission, right?
Right.
So we're happy to have you here with us. Okay.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Let's make sure we have a quorum. So do we have all accounted for starting at the end? Who do we have?
Ivy.
McEwen.
Ince.
Meekum.
All five present and accounted for. Tonight we'll start with a prayer or thought from our city manager, Steve Thacker.
Our Father in heaven, we are thankful to live in a beautiful community, a safe and peaceful community. Grateful for the many wonderful people who live here, give of their time as volunteers, who look after their neighbors, come to the aid of one another when in need, when there is a need. Grateful for the opportunity to exercise this self-government. Grateful for the rights given us by our Constitution, by those who have gone before us and have sacrificed much that we can enjoy what we have this day. We're grateful for that legacy of liberty, peace, and prosperity. We are grateful to those who put at risk their lives today in the military and our local emergency services, public safety personnel. We pray for their safety. Bless this council tonight with wisdom and good judgment, with the skills to explore the issues in a thoughtful way and express disagreements in a way that will foster a better outcome. And this we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Steve. At this time I invite anyone present to stand with me and to join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is the time in our meeting for the open session where any member of the public can come up to one of these two podiums and address any issue or bring up anything. Those that do, I'd encourage you to keep your comments to around 2 minutes. So that is now open for open session. We have a taker. Introduce yourself too.
Lisa Summer, Whitaker Museum Director. April is the beginning of our new storytelling for 2018, and I just wanted to give a little flyer to everyone so you're aware. It's next Tuesday night, and it's the history of Sanford Porter Sr., who is the founder of Porterville, but he was the first LDS bishop in Centerville. So it'll be at the museum on next Tuesday night. Also, May is, what do you call it? It's the month that we honor the police. And so our storytelling in May will be Chief Child telling the history of law enforcement in Centerville. Thank you.
Where is Porterville? I shouldn't, am I embarrassed to ask that?
Thank you.
So did Mr. Porter leave here and go there, or come
He
from there to
did.
here?
He actually, interesting story, he left here and went there. It's not the Porter Walton
Oh, okay.
nurseryman, that's a different person.
Ah,
He thought it was vain to have his photograph taken, so they thought there was no record of his picture. But Vestal Harrison, when he worked for the Clipper, was able to find one photo from a great-grandson. Anyway, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
'cause he has-
Any others for the open session? If not, then we will close the open session and we'll move to the business of the meeting. Number 1 on our agenda of minutes review and acceptance, and we have 2 minutes that we need to review and accept. So I'll take a motion on, when we're ready for a motion, let's do 2 separate motions. We got the March 21st, 2018 council meeting minutes, and we got the March 28th, 2018 council special meeting minutes from last week when we went up onto the hillside. So any suggestions, changes to the minutes?
I'd make a motion to approve both sets of minutes as currently prepared, since there were no changes.
We have a motion. Thank you. We have a motion and a second to accept both the March 21st and March 28th council meeting and council special meeting minutes. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will move on. Thank you. To item 2. This is the review the proposed general plan amendment regarding Pages Lane commercial area. We have our city planner, Corey Snyder, that will introduce that.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As you indicated in your previous meeting, there was some discussion about the Pages Lane area and the language that was proposed. If you recall, the language was fairly definitive about moving the direction of residential in the future and limiting some text and rezone amendments for commercial if that policy was to be played out. And there was some discussion to alter that and create a better balance between the existing commercial uses and any potential future residential. So the significant edits are in section 2 under the Pages Lane. This is the east half of that super block area. The first is the policy. It's written in there to recognize the existing commercial and the desire for the city to let that play out, either in redevelopment or keeping and maintaining the existing uses, but does indicate that if at some point in time it's not viable, that there would be a vision to look at converting the redevelopment to residential. So that changed Objective A, changing that language in the introductory paragraph. So we now are saying that the existing commercial is encouraged to be continued as long as the market demands prove sustainable. If they are deemed unsustainable, we're looking at the opportunity to go residential rather than industrial or something else of that nature. And then the other significant change is in Objective C. It's now changed from 3 to 5 acres to 5 acres, matching the PDO minimum size for anything more than single family. So those are the significant changes. So if you have questions about it, I'm here to discuss it. The purpose is to look at the language, make sure you're generally comfortable with the language, and then we go out to a public hearing notice, as we have done in times past, host the official hearing, and then you can hold the debate and decide the outcome of the new language.
When you say significant changes, do you mean from previously, before any of our attempts to amend, or do you mean?
I mean, the last proposed language was stronger and definitive about leaving the existing commercial in place, but saying we don't want to amend any zoning districts or uses in the zoning districts or text amendments to allow additional commercial uses. because that's been on the table, is you have a set of commercial uses, would we add more? The language previously was to limit that and not add more. The last discussion at the last meeting was to create a balance, because the discussion at that time was, well, if it can be successful commercial, let's leave it commercial. And then if it's not successful commercial at some point in time, go ahead with the vision to residential. And then there was some dialogue with the property owner discussing what their vision is, so they think they can develop it commercially. It may take some time to develop it. They might get some small users at first, but to do significant redevelopment commercially would take a long time. The residential uses they felt needed to be higher than the residential medium that's in the plan. And the feedback is let's create the balance. We have residential medium at 6 units an acre. If and when that can develop, that's great. But there was representation and idea that leaving it commercial was also an opportunity.
Right, so I read that in the changes for tonight, and it seemed to me like I was just reading that there was a little bit clearer language about encouraging commercial staying.
Yes.
And then as a last resort, letting it switch over to
Yes.
residential. But I didn't necessarily read or hear what you're saying, that there's an openness and directly stated openness to increasing the uses allowed. Did I miss that?
No, we took that restriction away. That was in the last draft.
So it's not that it's in there as a desire to do, but just previously there was a restriction that said we won't increase the number of.
Yeah, what the language now says, because before it was restricting, and the policy language under the goal was simply that we're moving towards residential. That was the primary point of that introductory language. The challenge in the discussion is maybe that's not necessarily the best direction. So the language took that away and just said, if commercial uses work, we'll work with you. If they don't work, we'll move to residential.
I'm just trying to understand the intent, because I wasn't here for the last discussion. If the intent is to just be a little more wishy-washy about whether or not we're pushing to go towards residential, I'm fine with that. But if the intent from the council is to say, we really kind of at all costs want to do all we can to keep it commercial, including increasing the use list, then I disagree with that intent. So I just want some clarification, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's where your debate is. And that's what the challenge was in the last meeting. I've hit a balance that doesn't say either way.
Right, so do you feel like that gives the council good protection to interpret the general plan depending on what
Yeah,
comes
the
to
interpretation
table?
would be is if it's commercially viable and somebody comes in with a use you like and it's not allowed, you'll consider changing it.
But if it's a use we don't like, the general plan isn't pushing us towards that with this language, in your opinion?
The language is honoring any viability potential of the commercial, and then you'll debate on whether something changes that matches your desire of that viability. It's open for interpretation either way.
Okay.
So, for example, if somebody came in and wanted to put a bakery in some of that building, it would not be allowed today.
I think the CH zone does allow bakery. The best example in the past discussions through the public hearing process is self-contained internal storage, not the typical storage but the climate control storage. There has been discussion about that. Climate control storage in previous past has not looked at a lot of favorability by the Planning Commission in previous recommendations to the council, and the council has left it as the Planning Commission has recommended it. But as you're aware, the property owner has represented that climate-controlled storage is a potential viable use for that property. And right now in the CH, it wouldn't be allowed. So this language would be leaving it debatable that if they came in with that proposal, you would debate whether you would entertain that proposal.
Okay. And then certainly, and not that I'm saying I agree with it, if something like that were to happen, which does not require such intensive parking, that would leave the building or the property owner the availability of developing something else.
Correct.
In some of the parking areas.
Yeah, and that's part of the discussion is if we can There's a substantial amount of parking. They might look at, in the commercial redevelopment at some point in time, creating some out pads, and that would be all pending the types of uses that are coming in and the parking demand for those uses, so you're correct in that assumption.
But we would not have to approve inside storage if we didn't want to.
No, there's nothing that's saying what will or will not be approved. You'll make that at a legislative level.
And then the language about requiring a PDO, is that on the east side? So I know that.
It's in both sections. If you go to residential, the PDO is listed as the way to rezone.
If you go to residential, but I also read, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time getting it open, but I also read that for commercial, it also would need to go through the PDO process.
Not necessarily. The commercial is, on the west side, is a balance of opportunities for mixed use.
So on the west side, the mixed use would have to go through the PDO process.
Yes.
On the east side, would any commercial redevelopment over a certain percentage have to go through the PDO process? No. Okay.
I should know this by now, but help me. 5 acres. Our total on the east side is 8 or 13?
It was 8, they represented it was 8.18 or something like that.
The
Is that
entire,
right?
the entire eastern block?
The eastern block, yeah.
I was thinking it was,
You're about 13 or 14 acres, the whole block, if I recall, something of that nature.
I thought they told us it was 13.
No, it's
top
8.
piece.
8. They represented at the last meeting, it was 8.18, I think is what they said.
Do we leverage ourselves into a difficulty with the 5 acres, because that says then you are hamstrung on the remaining 3? Should we be thinking 4 and 4 instead of 5?
It's really a policy decision, how do you want to approach it. The way the policy is currently written, it would be limited to convert to residential, because what the policy is saying is we only want to use the PDO to consider residential conversion. And the purpose of that, to use the PDO, is to look at the project as a whole and how it would integrate any remaining acres. And the language of the PDO is currently 5 acres. The last discussion was 3 to 5 because we could be more flexible. I heard to take away that flexibility and go directly to the 5. So currently it would be a significant portion of the property needs to be ripe for redevelopment to residential. And then you'll look at it, at that proposal, and see how the remaining 3 acres could stay in place, but yet still be integrated when it becomes ripe for redevelopment. And the PDO process is designed to do that. If you split that out and say the PDO, that's the debate that even the Planning Commission had, is how much property to convert, an acre, a half acre? Because if the most vacant piece is kind of in the center portion of that property, the old Dick's grocery store. The eastern half is still viable with the Ace and the cleaners and so forth. And so if you do just, the concern I've had as well as the commission had, is if you don't define something for conversion, then a portion can be cut off, split, and it's just pigeoned in there until some other time. And what we saw way back when, if you remember, Brighton Homes had about a couple of acres, and they wanted a 10-foot wall all around 3 sides to isolate from the commercial. And we thought that was not good residential integration, because your strongest portion of your neighborhood is the eastern half in that single-family area surrounding it.
I definitely like the 5 acres better, so that, I mean, it's a good sized development. It can't just go in and be a little pocket develop. I mean, anybody will build residential anywhere in Centerville they can. But we don't want them to go up there in the middle of a commercial and just build a little island of residential. If they're going to do residential, it needs to be a big enough piece that it's going to dominate that area, I think.
While I agree with that, the problem is if they come in and do 5, now you're left with 3.
Right, but then but you're going to get a pretty good sized development. At that way, then your 3 is probably going to be integrated into that. But if you go smaller, then you're going to get a development, and it's not going to have to include the rest of it.
I think the other issue is if you leave it at the 5, it signals the 3 acres that if somebody is coming in and creates a viable development of residential, you want at that point to send the message for the rest of the conversion
To go.
To go.
earlier than later.
So I think,
In other words, forcing all 8.
right.
Whether it's at the same time or shortly thereafter, yes, that's essentially what
They
they
could
call it.
come in with phases.
Well, I think as a property owner, I'd want to understand in Objective A, that it's great, because I like the fact that it's defined but yet nebulous. If I were the property owner, I'd really want to understand what it means if and when commercial viability is deemed unsuccessful. By what criteria am I being judged?
Yeah, that's the market. I mean, that's been the debate. Right now, the statement as coming out of the Planning Commission to you in the original language is, we've already hit that, so we want to move the direction. Now what you've heard in the public process is, well, maybe we haven't quite hit that. And so it's going to be that legislative debate as somebody's got to come in with 5 acres and say, I'm looking at the market patterns, I've had these vacancies for this period of time, I want to convert to the 5, and you'll look at that evidence and say, yeah, we agree with it at that time, or we disagree with it at that time.
So I guess what I'm trying to get closer to is the idea of a reasonable standard. So we can use vacancy as a viability standard?
Yeah, when you're dealing with the legislative rezone process, it's not, your decision-making is not as handcuffed as it is during the administrative, where you have to be evidence-based and have that substantial, or all these fancy words about how much evidence.
I looked at you for the fancy words.
Yeah, for the fancy.
This is a general plan amendment, which
Yeah.
allows a lot of discretion.
This is the discretionary power, the police power we've been, that we're granted to use under zoning, is to take public outcry, vacancies, owners, whatever evidence, and weigh that, and as long as it's reasonably debatable, then it's a fair decision in that process.
Now, for those that weren't here last time, I'm presuming it was Mr. Sweeney's comments that might have caused those of you here to accept the idea that maybe there is more commercial viability than previously thought.
Yeah, I felt like that the property owner was saying to us, it may still be viable, hang on for a little bit.
Yeah, that's,
You weren't here, but what we were
Right.
basically told was, what some people interpret as aggressive marketing to try and do something is not what others would interpret as aggressive marketing to try and do something. And the change of ownership opens some doors.
And if I may editorialize at that point on that hitch, I think that's a parcel message, but I don't think that's the full message, because I've had discussions before and after with the same individuals. And it goes summary like this. Does the city council understand how long it will take to redevelop commercially? We can fill some vacant spots now, but to do the out pads and a significant redevelopment, that's a long horizon. So in some ways, I'm not saying this was purposeful, but in some ways, they were trying to say to you, we can go commercial, it's going to take a long time, but if you would like it to redevelop quicker, we can go residential, but we can't do it at 6 units an acre.
that's just my only hesitation, is that the message of, no, really, just let us have more time to market it, it will go, is what we've been hearing for a decade already. So it's just not a new,
Right.
there really hasn't been any new information other than proposals that are a little bit pie in the sky ridiculous.
Now, the advantage of when we started setting this goal years ago, and then a year ago starting this process, I can say the improvement and control of the properties improved because it was split between entities in a similar same family situation or relationship situation, and has come together in their private agreements to market it as one piece under one name. So there may be some movement where before there might have been some dispute in the private sector about whose relationship dominates whose relationship. So, you know, I think they can fill some vacancies, but I do know that even from their view, to go to commercial is going to take a significant amount of time. Where if you went to what they represented, more than 6 units an acre, we could probably convert to residential faster than we can fill the commercial.
I guess in my opinion, and I wasn't here, and so we're dealing with what's been written up, but in my opinion, I would have said that I prefer to make it harder to do the commercial small bit by small bit. And I agree with making it difficult to do the residential into smaller chunks, but by not also making it harder to do the commercial, we're setting ourselves up to have to allow a little bit of the commercial redevelopment to happen at a time, which then puts us in a position to then, we're kind of forced to say it is going to be commercial, because if there's going to be some new investment,
yes,
then it doesn't make sense to turn our back on that new investment to see it go residential. And so I don't like the position it puts us in, because it's saying, hey, a half-acre parcel can get invested into, and then you have this brand new investment in only a tiny part of it, and then the argument is now, well, we've invested in new commercial, so now we just have to keep waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting.
Yeah, I think that's the reverse of what Councilmember Ince was pointing out. If you're setting the limit at 5 acres for the residential conversion, they're able to fill 4 acres of viable commercial. You've extended that viable commercial 15 to 20 years. Then the other 4 acres is, you know, the answer that I have of that is simply that's what general plans try to do, but you revisit them at a 5-year mark and at a 10-year mark, because you're not going to hit it exactly the first time. And so if 4 acres goes viable, 4 acres goes vacant, you can check that into the future and say, okay, now what would we reconsider? And that's the advantage of using a visionary document at this point.
I think you've hit it really well. I like the way it's stated, and I do prefer to have it be commercial if the options are commercial or higher density than we have right now. So I think you did a great job.
I think if it turns into a density discussion, that's definitely a problem. I see where Tammy's going on the promises. Mm-hmm. Consolidation is a new spin on the same story. Output speaks pretty loudly, and whereas I can respect the fact that the property owner is saying, hold on, we've now consolidated, this is not news to anyone, including them, the direction that the council has been leaning for a while on this issue. So that's where I was going back to that, what is our triggering point to determine commercial viability. I don't think that the council would be doing the community any favors by having infinite patience for continued vacancy and blight. So I guess that's where I was looking at where we were on that sort of definition process and how that would be triggered in the future. But outside of saying some very specifics about what that definition means, if they're listening or otherwise, it's pretty clear that the community would like to see something happen on that property and something good and viable quickly.
And I think that's a fair critique of the language. You know, there's certainly additional language if the council agrees with it by, you know, listing, you're going to be looking at how long vacancies occur, you know, yada, 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 for lack of.
Can you come up with a possible safeguard to add in to be more specific about that we don't want small pieces of reinvestment, which then traps us into the commercial, or some kind of, we'll give it this much more time, but then, you know.
Well, I'm your employee, so I can write anything. So yes, the answer is I could write it in. You know, the issue that's hard on our end is, so an example is I think of vacancies are pretty safe. You say vacancies occur for another 5 years, we're done on our horizon looking towards commercial and looking to the residential. So that's a fairly easy one. The piece by piece, as you deal with a strip center, at what point do you measure square footage? You have to fill so much square footage in order to do X, Y, and Z, and that becomes problematic on their leasing end, as they can grab one person at a time, and this one goes for 5 years, this one goes for 10 years, and then all of a sudden you try to do a language that triggers the redevelopment. You've got property owners saying, look, in the last 7 years we've put a major investment in, and now you're trying to change the course on us. And so they get uncomfortable. So can we do it? Yes. Is it hard to guess where those caps and limits are? Yeah. Yes. We put it in, and then if we discover that the caps are in error, we change them.
And I can understand that and agree with it to a point. What I would like to be at is from the perspective of the property owner and the local city government. I don't want it to be any surprise to them, and that they're here in 5 years from now taking umbrage with whatever council is in place, saying we didn't understand the criteria by which the council would force movement one way or another. I think if we can
force.
Well, you can make changes to the general plan. As they've indicated, it damages their property values if you say you're looking at residential. I think you can't force it, but you can be very distinct in what the zoning will look like in the future and where the plan will head. Trigger points I don't think are unfair. I think in most contractual language there is pretty significant metrics you meet, and they say if this happens, and this happens. And as much as we can make that, make the city accountable to the, or the city government accountable to the property owner, so that they're not saying you're being capricious and arbitrary in your decision process, and the reverse, you're extracting, for lack of a better term, contractual obligation from the property owner that this isn't a surprise. That's the direction I'd like to head, and of course I'm looking for guidance on how to do that.
Yeah, I think if you want some proposals on that, we can go back and roll up the sleeves again and try to come up with that criteria.
I absolutely agree with all of those points. I just think this puts us kind of between a rock and a hard place, especially if I understand the intent of the council saying, oh, we don't feel comfortable going up to 8 units an acre on residential, and so we're going to keep pushing commercial. But I think that from my take of the temperature is people are sick of seeing empty and blighted. And so at what cost are we going to save 2 units an acre? And the cost might be more high than what our citizens would like to see.
But having been here last time when they came, what they presented to us was very much, we have things ready, going, available in the next month and a half. We can put in commercial. And if you don't want us to do that, we need 8 units an acre. And I think that the citizens on the south end would much rather see a little bit of development, a little bit of investment, and some continued commercial than they would 8 units an acre. I'm not willing to go to the 8 units an acre over there.
And I totally agree with Stephanie. I think the neighborhood up there is going to scream really loud. They just now feel comfortable and protected that we're only 6 per acre and they can't do 8 per acre. I think you're undoing what we just did. And for you guys that weren't here, the property owner was here, and it actually is some of the same property owners, but they said, it's not, they said, the type of development that was trying to be done was an older type development. How do I say this?
I understand.
Politically correct. The people that were trying to redevelop it had an older view of things, and now obviously it's viable because these people have just purchased it from the other people, and they're saying we're going in for more like Amazon Go, things like that. In fact, they've already talked to them about it, and they stated that here.
Right, which we have to ask, what kind of commercial do we want in a residential neighborhood area? And that's my concern, is I'm imagining the kinds of things they're now going after, and does that belong in southeast Centerville? Though that is a very drastic change from a neighborhood service commercial type that services the neighbors there versus like an industrial, delivery trucks, et cetera.
But it's not industrial.
It's not industrial.
It's commercial, and it's already commercial. And what we're saying is, if you can do commercial there, which is what the citizens who live in that area are already familiar with and comfortable with, then the city benefits by having some property tax base, and some sales tax base, great. Let's do that. Let's not add more high density to an area where the citizens are already really angry.
Well, and I was very encouraged when this other group had taken it and said, we feel like we've got some good opportunities to keep it commercial.
It was a very positive.
It was a very positive.
We like the idea of it staying commercial, so we can market it this way approach that they came to us with.
Yeah,
so I feel very comfortable with the
I think
language.
their balanced argument is as well. They did represent we can bring some things in, think of the future. We could try to fill it. They also made the argument that if, in their view, at that time they made the argument. I don't know if it's changed, but it was at the time they made the argument a few meetings back. Was as if you put in the general plan a Forster residential, that in our minds devalues our ability to market to the commercial. So I think that's another fear that they might have. But taking this other side of the arguments about the residential, if you get some investment into commercial so that it doesn't come back later as a high density, that is a safeguard policy to make, is say, look, we're at 6, go get some commercial, and if you get 50% it rented in commercial, we've got another 10 to 15 years and not worry about a higher density. Where in 3 to 5 years, if they can't fill it at all, they'll probably come back and push and put pressure on more than 6 units an acre. So in some ways, you want them to fill it a little bit, taking the reverse argument. You want them to fill it a little bit so that they pursue that direction.
I agree.
So taking a different view at the long term, when do we next do a general plan update? Isn't that supposedly every 10 years?
Well, Centerville's chosen because of most of the neighborhoods that build out. The pattern by default is look at different areas and change it. So the current effort of this council, I think it started with all of this council, was to take the first look at the southeast area, because that was your main street and that was a good portion of your south end on the density issues. We're trying to get there to wrap up this southeast because we still have the southwest that has the issues of at least the densities associated with it. So right now we are doing it as neighborhood by neighborhood rather than trying to do a citywide general plan change. There's some wisdom in it because there's enough significant build out to try to re-envision the entire city again and say, let's set the future of the city again in an existing build out is a little bit rough. If we go to the neighborhoods like we did the West Centerville years ago, we haven't completed the expanded version of that, but we set a direction there, we're coming back into the southeast, and as we fill out those edits, then we could go back and say, okay, what policies on the global view are still running either contrary or not supporting the different neighborhood plans. So an example in the big general plan, the main body, there's no residential on the west side. That language still sits in the general plan. But the west side update changed that and didn't follow that. So there are some higher policies that need to be fixed, but we've chosen to go in and edit the areas that are important, and then we can come back and look at the overall vision and fix and correct those.
I was looking at a general update triggering a reconsideration in a 3 to 5 year period, which to me is a time frame for reevaluation.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you would look at your general plan every 5 years. The way we've been doing it is we would look at our neighborhood plans every 5 years to see where we're at.
I'm with you, Stephanie and Robin, in so much that I'm not interested in increasing a density for an impression of viability. If they think they can do something in 90 days, great. They're going to beat the local government to action anyway, unless we really were on top of all the noticing and made that our top priority. So it may be a self-solving problem. The question will come down to what Tammy was saying is, if they bring us something that is unpalatable, then it's a different situation. But if they've got marketing inside existing uses, the problem is self-correcting, at least to some degree.
Well, our decision for tonight is just to move forward and have this go to a public hearing, which would include further debate and possible edits. So I think we can move forward in that way. The only question I would have is, George and I have both agreed and pointed out that maybe some additional kind of language that's saying we have a pretty low tolerance for how long this is going to take, just to be more clear about that, would make me feel a little more comfortable. Whether or not the rest of the council wants to have you add that in before we
Yeah,
move
and
forward.
I think it's strategic. We can make a draft at it. The reverse of my mind is move forward and bring that issue up in your debate into the public hearing and
Right.
have those discussions to see if there's other buy-in for what that criteria would be.
And I'm okay with that. This is the parental first warning. There's still plenty of escalation left before somebody gets
Sure.
grounded.
Right.
So, this stage, it's nebulous, but in terms of what is the criteria by which you're going to get judged, but at the flip side, it does signal there is some requested action. So I'm fine leaving the language alone and then bringing it up in the public hearing.
I just have one typo edit on the section 2, Pages Lane Eastern Block segment. In that paragraph, the first new, in the blue, the new text, due to substantial use and building vacancies over the past few years, it remains the intent. So you just need to delete that is. It remains the intent.
Good catch.
Any other comments?
Sounds like we should advertise this for public hearing on the 17th then? Is that what the council wishes?
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds like we're fine with it.
Okay.
Is that a bad day because of income taxes?
I
Will that
told,
affect many people other than two of us?
I told Steve earlier today I may or may not be here, so.
We could push it.
Let's push it.
Push
till
it.
they're all-
Yeah.
I'm fine pushing in a month, even.
I'm glad to push it.
I would like to see as many people as were here for the bike park, but,
Well, we could do that, but I'm not sure the right
You better get
message would
those
get
scouts
out.
again to do some advertising.
So you're saying May 1st?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
say-
think that makes more
I'm fine
sense.
with May 1st, and then that'll be easier on you too.
And that lets the property owner get a little further down the road, so their story may have firmed up by that point into something that they can come back and talk to the public about.
Yeah.
So let's give them the time and.
Yeah, they communicate with us and when's the next meeting, so we can let them know.
So part of this public notice process, as Corey has recommended anyway, will be direct mailing to property owners in the vicinity, right, Corey?
Property and business owners. We have done that consistently through the process, so I think it's fair to, it's above and beyond the normal, but when you're dealing at this higher level, you don't have to post sites or anything, so we chose to make sure that we did
So
an
that
extra
would
notice.
would that include all of 3rd East and 4th East over to Porter's Lane?
No, it's only property and businesses fronting Pages Lane and Main Street.
can we put up, I mean,
A
the
notice on it.
A-frames that you've had on some of the things that have been posted lately are much more attention getting.
Yeah, we can add that in there.
That'd be
I'd
great.
love to see as much publicity as possible.
The issue that gets communicated when you post a sign is that somebody thinks that property's being developed, and they don't really peruse the sign very well, and often property owners get uncomfortable when you start placing signs in their yard if they're not proposing something. It's not in their yard, but just as long as Randy doesn't pick it up.
He wouldn't dare if you put it up. I think anything we can do to stimulate
Yeah.
attendance.
And do we send any letters to the school district? Have they ever weighed in on anything related to?
We have to, in this process, send all of the affected entities, and the school district is one of them that gets the notice.
Have they ever weighed in on anything in the past, or just they
One
thank us for the notice?
thing, Legacy Crossing, when it went through its process, the school district actually attended the meeting and made a comment, but other than that, I'm not aware.
I think our solution, Councilman, is do a spin-off from the Trails Committee. It's a marketing committee, and they'll get the people here, because they did a heck of a job marketing that. And the enthusiasm was great. Yeah, I'd love to have that kind of enthusiasm, excitement at every public hearing. So.
Don't hold your breath.
Oh, you pick the right issue, it happens.
That's right. It's all about issues. So, any other comments?
Just one, we get more people at our planning hearings than you get at your budget sometimes, just so you know.
That's true.
You trying to make us feel bad?
Thank you, Corey, and thank you all council members for your participation. Let's move then to item 3 on our agenda, which is talking about and authorizing mapping and drainage study of city foothills property. This relates to where we took the field trip last week, and our city manager, Steve Thacker, is going to introduce that topic.
Thank you, Mayor. Kevin Campbell, city engineer, is in the audience, and he will address you at some point in a minute here. And then I'd also have asked Corey Snyder to speak about a process to prepare a use management plan. But just as a framework, the scope of work that Kevin has proposed, the first 2 steps of it, which he has given you fee proposal for, I think is a very important foundation for a number of processes and decisions that will be made or will occur hereafter. So it's not a sexy matter, but it's a pretty important foundation to map the property with a high reliability and prepare a drainage study so that we know what the impact of different decisions may be, and particularly to perhaps as important as anything is to protect the folks downstream. So with that, Kevin, why don't you come up and explain. I've asked Kevin to explain what the outcome or products of this work would be, these first 2 steps that we're recommending you fund out of the Drainage Utility Fund.
So yes.
Introduce yourself for those viewing you on YouTube.
Yeah, my name's Kevin Campbell. I'm the Centerville City Engineer. Thanks for having me here tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Steve mentioned, we really need a decent topographic survey so that we can analyze the drainage. What we would do is we'd take the topographic survey, we would break this 180 acres plus. The drainage area is actually larger than the 180 acres. And we would break that into sub drainage areas and determine where the runoff from each sub area is headed. We would calculate, we would typically do a 25-year runoff event, a 50-year runoff event, and a 100-year runoff event. And we would see what those flows, what would happen in the different drainage ravines and channels. One of the, I think the important aspects of this, as Steve mentioned also, is right now the residents down below here between Pages Lane and First South or so, there may be some risk there currently without any future uses, just due to the fact that the dike has been breached in several areas. Some of it's been filled in. The sediments have filled some of that detention volume in. And so the plan would basically come up with what drainage infrastructure ought to be installed to protect those folks downstream. How should it be detained? So they would be fairly simple concept plans and concept estimates that then you could make decisions based on. We wouldn't go to an elaborate amount of design, but again, just enough design to get cost so that you can see if that's something that's feasible, that's realistic. So really, that's the main product that you would come of this is those concept plans and estimates. And also a drainage risk analysis of, okay, at what point are these folks at risk? Is it the 25-year event? Is it the 50-year event? So that would also be a product of this study.
So Kevin, how do you take into account the soil itself and the nature of the soil? Is the makeup of the soil already well known and documented, or would you at some point perhaps be wanting to get some kind of a soil samples or analysis that helps you judge how much percolation can occur versus what you need to, so you know how much detention you need to allow that percolation to occur?
Yeah.
Or whether you need to carry it off in a pipe or a ditch or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question. We may need to take some samples. There's different classifications. This is probably going to be a very sandy classification. Some of the soils that have been brought up there have a little bit more clay and topsoil in them, but
Brought up?
Into the bowl area, you mean?
Into the bowl area that have been used as fill. For the most part, I don't think we'll have to do a lot of testing to determine the soil type. I think that and some of those soils that are not as sandy probably ought to be removed from the bowl area, maybe put up on the banks.
With regards to the GPS survey that's going on along with the drone, what packages are we flying on this drone? Are we flying LiDAR? Are we flying some sort of laser rangefinder? What is our digital output product? Because if we're going to do this, I'm hoping we get some level of accuracy that we in future years, if we do another flyby, we can do a compare.
Yeah, the level of accuracy for this drone, so this is a drone that our surveyors use on UDOT projects, or they're going to be using on UDOT projects. So the level of accuracy is to a tenth of a foot, and so you'll have a DTM is what they call it. That's a fancy term. That you'll have a CAD drawing that will produce. We'll probably just produce 1 or 2 foot contours off of it, but the accuracy will be to the tenth of a foot. So we'll know the inverts of those culverts. We'll know with very, very high accuracy. I'm not positive how high up onto the hill he'll be able to go, maybe up past the V a little ways, but we can still calculate that drainage area even if he's not able to get to the peak of that mountain.
Why would he not be able to get to the peak of it?
Oh, he was asking me if
Aerial
he
capacity
would be able to access up above, which he may be able to through, is it the Skyline Drive?
Skyline.
So he may be able to access up through Skyline Drive, and then
As the operator, he's
fly
got to
the rest
be
of
in
that.
close proximity to the drone. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, he does. And I'm not sure exactly the proximity.
And I don't know how it works
He
either.
mentioned 8 to 10 flights to fly this area. And
You can hike up there, just tell him to wear his boots, it's okay.
Yeah, but then he's got to get the drone and
We
himself.
we have a member of our trails committee that's been clear to the top. I'll have him take him.
yeah.
That's great. That's a level of accuracy above what I thought we would get out of it. And at least if we looked at this, Steve, as this is the initial survey, the work gets done, and that at a future point, we just come back and compare this, whatever that frequency is deemed to be 5 years, 10 years, at least you've got a historical of what's happening up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's just become more and more a stronger conclusion on my part that we really need to do this groundwork, so to speak, this foundation to prepare a plan for sustainability for the use of this property up there. And I think these steps are critical to that. So we can sustain the long-term recreational uses that the council ultimately will continue to approve of up there.
Well, and with that level of data, and this is beyond the scope of this discussion, but at some point we may consider wanting to print a small, low-resolution 3D model of what's up there. It becomes a much easier talking point when you're pointing down on. Contour maps are great for some people, but I think we can get everyone involved when we get to the 3D level.
That would be really cool.
Any other questions for Kevin? I
have one that's related to this but not related to this. As it turns out, while I was up hiking the morning of the day that we did the field trip, quite a ways north, half a mile north of where we were, I came upon an area where someone had done some digging and utility work of some kind right along the edge of the fire road. There were 3 what looked like vent pipes, brand new, that were poking out of the ground that hadn't been there in the past. And there was an area that was probably 15 feet by 25 feet that had been dug up and then re-leveled. Of course, there was no grass on it because it had been re-leveled. That area is going to be ripe for erosion, and there are other areas where I have noticed in the past where work has been done. It's been leveled off, but then because there's nothing planted there, it begins immediately to erode. Do we have any ability to control that and force people to reseed or otherwise repair the damage that has been done while they're doing work?
So most of the fire break road is a lot of it on county property, and some of it's on Forest Service, some of it's on private property, but most of it is not in the city limits. So that's a good question, but I don't know that the city enforces fire activity up along the fire break road.
Don't you suspect this is probably the Weber Basin folks that are doing work on their pipeline?
That sounds.
And they have the ease. Oh, did he?
Yeah, he's further north. He's up 1900 north or so, but is it north of the Dual Creek irrigation pond?
Yeah, it's quite a ways north of the Dual Creek. This is up about 1800 north.
Oh, it's that far north. Okay, so that may be as far north as the Gray Jensen. So what he's been doing up there is he's been asked to get a geological survey. He's had to hire a geologist to map any of the faults, and so he's dug probably a half a dozen or so trenches, and he may have some monitoring devices in those trenches. So after he... Yeah, he's been moving quite a bit of dirt around up there. But the revegetation, yes, I'd definitely say when they come in for a permit for a subdivision, when they come in for permits for their site plans, that's got to be part of their remediation effort, is to revegetate those slopes.
Well, I mean, this, and I don't know that I could determine whose property it was on, so maybe it's something that ought to be channeled through the county, but we all are going to have problems if that kind of situation continues. That road, so if you hit the Fire Break Road off of Oak Ridge and about 1300 north, then there is a large gully just to the north, and the area that I'm talking about is just coming out of that gully. That road collapsed 10 years ago and had to be completely rebuilt.
Okay,
now,
I know where you're at.
Whose fault that was, I have no idea. but the road had completely collapsed and was unpassable, and had to be redone. And part of that, at least to what I could see, came from a culvert that had been put in, and then nothing was done to revegetate it. So,
Yeah, I think that portion in particular is supposed to be maintained by, is it the county, the city, and Weber Basin, kind of cooperatively?
Well, Weber Basin has taken the position that they will maintain the road to that level which they need for their own use. And if the city or county want it in better condition, then it's the obligation of the city or county to do so. That's the position they've taken. That area you're talking about that collapsed, I'm assuming is the area that we actually entered into a three-way partnership, though, the city, the county, and Weber Basin, to restore that piece of road there.
right there at Ricks Creek.
Yeah, is that what the one?
Yes, that's the spot.
Yeah.
Well, this is just another quarter of a mile north. The one I'm talking about, the most recent, is a quarter of a mile north.
So if somebody has made it less than it was, wouldn't they be expected to at least bring it back to what it was when they started digging?
Well, we can take a look at it, and Bill, if you want to come in and look at a map with us and mark where you think that is, and we'll have somebody look at it.
I can do that. The other thing, I don't know if it has anything to do with it or not, but I informed the police department that same day that there was a trailer up there semi-permanently camping.
Oh,
The police department had investigated a couple of times but hadn't found anybody, is the last I'd heard.
It was a temporary person from Idaho that had taken a job down here. I talked to the police chief today, and told them they couldn't be along the road up there, so
Okay.
that's what it was. So I think what we need to decide here is three things. We're determining if the drainage study should be done as a council, and our city manager has provided us the cost estimate.
yeah, for showing up there.
And then where the money comes from if you determine that you do want that drainage study to be done. So that's the way I see it and what we're trying to decide here.
Let me seek a clarification from Kevin. Kevin, presuming you want those two amounts combined for a not to exceed, or do you want to control on each?
I was planning, Steve, on calling those out as two work products and accept the statement of work and fund it from the drainage utility fund was
Okay.
the motion I'm looking for.
Okay.
Is that acceptable, Kevin?
Yeah, I think combined hourly not to exceed, unless you just wanted the mapping, but the mapping is kind of
I think we need
obviously
both halves.
needed for the drainage study.
Yeah.
So Steve asked me to break those out to kind of give an idea of how much would be allocated to each, but yeah, I think a combined hourly not to exceed would.
14,500 is what the total would be, those two, right? I think?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Then I'll make a motion that we accept the statement of work and commission the mapping and the master, or the drainage master plan to the amount of 14,500 not to exceed, and fund this from the drainage utility fund.
Second. Sorry.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, let's do a roll call vote on that motion, starting with Councilwoman Meekum.
Aye.
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 And I should have mentioned that the time frame Kevin says
That was
would
one of my
be
next.
completing the work by about sometime in June. Is that still correct,
Yeah, I think that we can
Kevin?
get on the mapping here in the next few weeks, and yeah, I'm hoping for a 2-month process, so yes, that would be,
Sometime in June then.
yeah.
Okay. At this point, I'd like Corey to come up and speak to, did you have anything else for Kevin?
I did have one
Oh.
question. I was really concerned about the way that the motorized vehicles are being used as we were watching them. Is there something we can do faster than 2 months from now to put in some sort of, here's where you're allowed perimeter, so that we're not having the erosion continue to spread? Because this is peak usage time right now. As it's starting to get light and warm and everybody's itching to be out of school, this is when we're going to get the heavy use up there in the bowl area and extending into the areas where it is causing a problem.
Yeah, I think your least expensive option would probably be some of that temporary, it's maybe 3 foot tall orange plastic fencing that maybe you could just use in areas where they're breaching the areas they ought to be in.
The problem is if you only go those areas, they'll just shift to the side.
Yeah, they might go around them and you might have to police that, but, or something for a longer distance. That's probably your least expensive product that's out there that would be fairly easy to install. You might even be able to get some volunteers or, but it's quite a long stretch though, you know, so that's,
is that a couple thousand feet?
Anyway.
Yeah, that's
anyway.
Half a mile, it's half a mile wide about, is that?
Oh, and I've never seen that fence survive long. That fencing is usually found in tatters wherever you find it deployed. So that's a sunk cost one-off.
Yeah,
I don't know that I'd want to use that.
Maybe they'll use it as finish lines, like they're going through it.
Right.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Stephanie. I don't know how you would take a sum of money that wouldn't last very long, probably.
Right.
The product wouldn't last very long. Let's get Corey up here and talk about this use management plan, because that relates to what you're talking about.
I've got a quick question. We're broadcasting in black and white. Why are we doing that? We can't see anything in the image.
It was color 2 hours ago. I don't know. I think it's I don't have access to the network to be able to do anything.
Oh, okay.
Before we go to Corey, Avalon, did you note that that vote passed 5-0? Okay. And as far as, Steve, we talked about the bid results on frontage road.
Well, I thought we would keep Kevin around, let's finish this topic, and then before Kevin goes, have him speak about the frontage road and the bid results, which I was going to cover under city manager's report, but that would allow Kevin to go sooner rather than waiting around. But maybe,
so do we need Kevin to stay or not?
Yes, we do, until
yes,
Corey's.
That's why I was just making sure he didn't slip away.
Yep.
Okay. Corey, come on up.
Since your field visit, I've been up there a couple of times. One of them was to take Randy, because he knows where to take a truck that I don't dare go. And we had some fun up there. We also took a minimal amount of staff there on yesterday to talk about some things. Steve wanted me to at least address my early thoughts to you and maybe prepare something that's kind of coordinated with Kevin's work here. I think we have 2 segments. They obviously will integrate with each other, because if you talk about the bike trails, the ATV use, we have to talk about them in the context of the use of the property of the future. But at the same time, as I've walked the property, looking at the facilities, where they're used, who's using it, we had a good time. The interesting part was the little trail taking you up by the gun range. The flag was up, and I walked that trail, vest, and yeah, Randy was my vest. He was the bright guy walking out in front of me.
Doesn't sound bright either way.
It wasn't bright, but, and it was interesting to the point where I became uncomfortable, and I was a significant distance from risk when I became uncomfortable and said, Randy, we're turning around. I don't know what you're doing. So you look at the management and the issues that are associated with it. I think we have a use management plan as we look at the property now and the condition it's in and the risk that might be involved in that. And I think we need to kind of wrap our minds around what it takes to understand that. And I think the data that you've allowed to be gathered will help start looking at that. I think there's also a significant issues where we have a lot of material that's usable, that's filled in. Kevin mentioned some that could be used on the berms. That material can be used in any restoration efforts, control efforts, roadways, whatever we might see that where we can get our minds around the existing users. There's a ton of through users the other day walking. So regardless of future uses in the debate of that, we have the ATV uses, you have the concerns you raised on the erosion. I think hill climbing is not an activity that's good for that area given the conditions of the soil. But I do think that as we look at what's happening there and getting our arms around it, it will lead also into the future use discussion. But we have some material that if we're dealing with the ATV and that's there now, what do we do in the interim as maybe more facilities in the future could be developed? So that if we're going to keep the ATV users for the time being and not take that away from them, we've got to give them activities that will work and eventually put in the future use plan on what type of those activities would occur. Same with the gun range. I think there is discussions when looking at their aerial photos, the amount of time that they use, what part of the facility they use. Your lease is coming up on we need to have a discussion about the gun range and its future use and their capacity of taking care of the road that's going up that's not taking place, and start wrapping our minds around how do we create a better partnership that works. So I think it's wrapping our minds around a use management plan as we see it now, and whether we take away or add is the future use that will come subsequent to that. And so I think involving the youth council in some census work on the users of the area, trying to find out where they're coming from, who's using it on a regular basis, documenting some of the erosion, whether we look at Utah State University and some restoration plans and range management. I don't know what all the ideas are, but we got to figure that out right now. And then we can add or subtract from that use management plan for future land use, because there's obviously not enough money to fund everything to happen all at once and make everybody happy at the same time. But so I see it as a two-step management plan now, and integrating that into a subtract or add future use plan.
So I asked Corey to prepare a process that he can present to you in 2 weeks. Is that still reasonable, Corey?
Yeah.
So we're just giving you an introduction to the idea, but in 2 weeks, the idea is to bring you something fleshed out. Here's a process that we recommend we go through to determine better management of what's happening and add or subtract uses, as he says.
I think that sounds great.
So when you say you were nervous, can you define that a little bit more? Was it just because there was shooting close to where you were walking, or did you feel like people were shooting where they should, in a direction they should not have been?
Thanks for allowing me to clarify. I didn't feel that I was going to be at risk from anything from the range. But it is disconcerting when you're on the down range and you hear the firing going off and you know where it's coming from and where it's hitting, and you're down range from that, even though I was low on the hillside. The trail that's up there that you can follow takes you up into some shrubs. It's not far off the line of direction. And that current underutilized trail. And as I rounded the little knoll and watched that trail go up along that brush that's just down from the face of the range, yeah, it's a little nervous, because you trust that everybody is shooting the right direction and the right target. But when you're downrange from that, it's still an uncomfortable feeling. Now, I'll be honest with you, I am not an avid, I've been hunting as a kid, but I'm not an avid gun person, so I have some hesitancy and some inherent concerns when I hear firing going off. I have the same concern when I sit out at Antelope Island at the entrance and there's that unofficial gun area, and they're shooting the other direction and I'm watching a sunset, and I just keep watching to make sure that they're shooting that direction, because I'm apprehensive as an individual to begin with. And so I think that's a fair representation of public who is not educated and understanding a firing range, how it could be disconcerting.
Well,
And then
and
you have the shooters that would be disconcerting if somebody naive. I mean, at least I was being very cautious. What about the person that's got the headphones on and they don't really pay attention to what they're doing and
Don't even notice the flag or why
don't
it's
even
there.
notice the flag? So there's inherent conflicts, and I think there's ways to deal with them. And there's material that we can use up there. I think we do restore it to a recharge basin, and that has lapsed. When you walk that entire area, you'll see how it's not out of control in the sense of risk to people, but it is not being used and maintained properly. And the water's piling up in different areas. We have some springs that are sitting up there that we have rights to. And so some of the restoration plans that we could be looking at, regardless of the future uses, and some minor enhancements that we talked about with people and through users and walkers. I think there's some restroom issues. We now have a number 1 and a number 2 tree. We know which one's number 1 and which one's number 2. Up there, we discovered that while we were there. And so I think we have some issues to address. Sorry, I just threw that in at the last second.
But Corey, I don't think you want them to think that by what you just said about the recharge basin, that would preclude the other uses in that basin. I think
I think
Corey sees that as very
I see
compatible.
We have a lot of material to work with to, and then we've got to get to the point that once we kind of have our minds around this management plan idea that needs to likely take, now we're starting to engage the stakeholders and everything else into the process and decide which, and then the issue is funding. I think that funding access and sectoring the area is an important future, and obviously it can't be all done at once, so where do we start with that and who do we engage with? And I think it's a really neat piece of property, but I think after Councilman Ince got up there, is thanks to the Bike and Trails Committee to let us know that we have this great piece up there, but it's got some problems.
Also to on Stephanie's comment, I've done a little talking to some ATV riders and a few things about up there and what we could do to stop and their idea, which I thought was really good, was to create 2 or 3 of those places that they can do it. Then we might be able to fence off the others. Like you said, if you fence everywhere they're going, they're going to make new. But if we chose 2 or 3 areas that they can do their loop-de-loop up there on the mountain, then we could maybe close off the rest. And even signage it and say, if you use these, we'll leave them. If you're going everywhere, there aren't going to be any. And maybe they'll appreciate, but they said, if you take them all away, we're going to create new ones.
Yeah,
so we maybe need to look at making.
And we do. I mean, I think that's what Kevin's study will let us know on the soils issue. I mean, from my perspective, the facilities hill climbing is probably your greatest risk in erosion issues. So if that is to be eliminated and we can show the data to show that need and the restoration efforts that'll take place, there's other facilities that we can provide to them to ride in, and depending on the extent that we want to consider how those facilities would work, with the other staff, I showed some example facilities for walking, mountain biking, leisure activities up there. They're far yet to be decided, but I do. That's part of that resource. We got to, if something's being taken away and they're going to stay present on the property, which is a decision to be made. We have to provide something else that gets them to enjoy some riding to take away if the hill climbing is going to be taken away. I don't even want to say it's taken away yet because there's ways to handle hill climbing, but it's just so much to discuss and decide yet. It's not worth trying to decide that.
Is there any kind of a representative of the ATV and motorcycle community that could be engaged into this discussion? I mean, we know when we heard through the Trails Committee about various stores that act as focal points for the mountain bikers. But is there someone that can represent the other group and can serve as a go-between to try and get information out to the other group and get them to police themselves about the destruction that's going on, that we can get involved in it for our own benefit?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the hope. The management plan would involve kind of a census, a use census, however that plays out. We'll figure it out, but a use census so that we know who's kind of using it, if they belong to a club. My sense to the people that I've talked to, you're having local users that just want to come home from school or whatever and take a quick ride out. The out-of-town users are not really part of a club. They're testing out their equipment and having a quick little fun with it before they take it out to the Knolls and race around there. So you have this unofficial, go test the equipment out, have a little bit of fun, or quick afternoon to just take their quad out and have fun with it. And then the local. So that's my sense, is it's not an organized group from a club standpoint, but I wouldn't say that there isn't members that belong to a club or that we can engage businesses that sell that product to promote and discuss the issue of if we're going to keep ATV use there, what should it look like?
Well, and that might be part of the overall plan, is if we have to go up there and push dirt around anyway for other activities. We're not going to be anything like, I was just looking it up, the Jordan River off-highway vehicle state recreation area down there in Rose Park. I don't know if you've seen that area. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's 350 acres according to what it says here. We're not going to get anywhere close to that, no. But potentially we could push together some dirt into some very nice, challenging features and contain the use, potentially. It would have to be part of that, and as Bill's saying, we'd need some input, but I'm sure if we got people out there and said, would you like to raise some money to create a great motocross run inside the bowl that's friendly to the environment and very challenging, and we'd probably get some people to come out for that.
I think that's something we should strongly look at.
So we'll bring back something for you to react to in a couple of weeks as far as a process plan.
And Corey, I just wanted to add, whether you're not an avid shooter or an avid shooter, downrange is no fun for anybody. So it's not just you.
I just was downrange.
Yeah, downrange is not usually a good thing. So
it just takes one careless shooter.
It's not even really a careless shooter. You get enough energy, and a lot of those rifle bullets can travel a long distance. I mean, they've been shooting up there for a long time, and they've got a good angle, but it's. If you look at military ranges, they see anybody in their peripheral vision, they shut them down because bullets can go different directions. Being lower helps, but if you come up above and you're outside their sight line, all bets are off. So that's the one that concerns me most, is that ranges and hiking and biking are not compatible uses. The flag and even the report of a rifle are not enough to keep people safe. I've been in exactly what you're talking about with Antelope and Stansbury, and I have seen motocross guys come over the hill into active firing areas. And it's just through the diligence of the shooters down there, watching and knowing that people come up over that hill, that prevents people from getting hurt out there more often. So it's really, that's a tough issue for me. If anything, I would prefer that there isn't an accessible area that's downrange, because that is one of the few remaining long-range rifle ranges in the state that's easily accessible, and I would prefer to see that use maintained without putting people at risk.
From personal experience now, agreed.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it. We're going to skip to ask Kevin to come back up. We wanted Kevin Campbell, our city engineer, to discuss the bid results on the frontage road. Is that correct?
Well, it's the bid results for our street overlay work. We put out 2 bids every year. One is for pavement overlay work, and the other is for crack sealing and slurry sealing. That second bid is still out there pending. It'll be opened sometime later this month. And we're holding off on awarding the first bid on the overlay work till we see the results of the second bid, because we may be bringing to you some expanded scope of work. Because if we get some good prices on the other, like we did on the pavement, then we may be able to do more work than we had intended. But the big chunk of this pavement overlay work is, this first bid is the frontage road. And I want you to understand the fact that we have two projects on the frontage road this year. One is the federally funded one, and the other is a local project. And unfortunately, we're not being able to, due to the limitations of the federal regulations, we can't integrate those two like we'd like to. So you're going to get some puzzled folks out there wondering why we're working on the frontage road at two different points in time, and why didn't we do this along with that? And so you need to be ready to answer those questions. That's why I'd like Kevin to explain that to you.
Yes, so the city's project is on frontage road overlay, is to overlay the existing pavement surface. The state's project is to widen on the west side. It's been a couple months ago, I think, but we brought in those cross sections of what it was going to take to widen and to get the 2 5-foot bike lanes. There's a section in front of the residential that's going to have on-street parking. And then in front of the park, there will be limited on-street parking due to visibility, so we'll have to make sure we hash that out far enough away from those entrances that there's not line of sight issues. But as Steve mentioned, you know, ideally we would come in and just overlay the whole pavement after it was widened. But that would cause the city to pay the entire cost of that extra 2 inches on top of the widening, which is tens of thousands of dollars. So we want the state's project to pay for that. And so there will be a seam along a lot of that edge. The state's project is also going to be putting in curb and gutter on the east side, north of Lexington Park. There's 2 or 3 gaps along that area that they will be putting the curb and gutter in, some drainage facilities, and widening that pavement on the east side. And again, there's going to be a seam along there because their project is going to pay for the full cost of the new pavement to the future height. And so again, we're not able to mix federal, that project's federally funded. We're not able to mix federal and city dollars. One thing we're going to try to do is, depending on who gets the state project, we're going to let them know who our contractor is. We're also letting our contractor know to hopefully he'll bid on the state's project. So one idea is that we would let the state's contractor know who our contractor is, and maybe he could use him as a subcontractor, and it could potentially be overlaid all at once. That's kind of a little bit of a long shot, but it's something that we're willing to try to coordinate. So the striping is going to be included in the federal project, the state federal project. At one time we thought we might come in and try to slurry seal that this fall and stripe the whole thing, but Randy would like to see us get a couple few years of wear and tear on the pavement surface before we slurry seal it, which is a good idea. So again, as Steve mentioned, you might be getting some questions as to why we went in and overlaid, and now they're coming and adding on to the west side and parts of the east side. We're just going to try to see how long we can postpone our contractor. There is quite a bit of work that he needs to do, remove and replace of pavement sections before the overlay goes in. So we're going to see if he'll work with us, see if he'll delay as long as he can, and
We want him to delay too, because we've got the work going on at the park, and that's the trucks, construction equipment traveling on the frontage road. We'd like that to occur before we improve that road.
We had talked about last time possibly putting some water over to the other side of the road as part of this or prior to. Where do we end up on that as far as the cost and feasibility?
Yeah, those projects will go in before the overlay. That project is scheduled to be bid out next week. We hope to have those bids for you the next council meeting. That's what we're pushing for. So that would be awarded hopefully next council meeting.
But I think we need to clarify, though, George may be thinking these are all crossings for potentially irrigating landscaping along the west side, but actually 2 of the 3 are for stubbing under the road for future extension under the freeway, right? For culinary water to serve the west side.
Yes.
And the 3rd one, though, is an irrigation extension under the frontage road for the purpose of irrigating potentially along that west side.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Well, I wanted you to understand that because you may get
ask
questions about it. Okay.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, we'll keep you updated when the state awards their contract. That might be, they're hoping to get bids in late May and maybe get their contract awarded in mid-June. So we'll update you at that time to see who their contractor is.
Thanks,
We'll keep
Kevin.
our fingers crossed for any possible coordination.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Kevin.
you, appreciate it. I want to mix up the agenda here a little bit. Should we table the cemeteries discussion, Bruce?
Yeah, I'm a little
Steve?
puzzled why Bruce isn't here. I thought I had sent that message, and apparently either I didn't send it or it wasn't understood, but so I guess we need to postpone that till Bruce can be here.
Okay, because it's a concerning matter, but not really pressing, and we're a bit behind on the agenda.
I will tell you, we'll tell you this, that we have identified, I can share this much, because this was going to be the first part of Bruce's report, and that is that, would you bring up the cemetery picture? Section A is the oldest section of the cemetery, and Bruce's guys, as time has permitted, have looked at the first 5 rows of Section A and have found about 30 spaces that can be used.
Which is Section A? Section
A is the left half there, not counting the part down by 400 South. That left square.
Okay.
Well, that whole square, yeah, that right there. That's Section A. And it's just the first 5 rows that they've been able to measure off and look at carefully, and found these 30 spaces that can be sold. So those are available to be sold for immediate need. And if somebody does come in for an immediate need space, a resident, they can also buy a second one. That's our policy.
And are those double depth spaces or single?
No, single depth.
And what does that bring our running total to available spaces to?
Well, that's
for immediate need.
30.
Essentially 30, but that's the first 5 rows of Section A, and as they get time, they're going to determine for the rest of Section A how many more spaces. But
he came in with about 30 throughout.
There's 30 spaces in the first 5 rows. There's 32 rows in Section A, so Bruce thinks it's going to generate
problem solved.
quite a number. In terms of meeting immediate need, the problem is stalled off.
But to Robin's comment, I thought that we had 30 or 40 that had either been bought back or something that.
Well, he said he'd found that many.
3 months
So
ago.
this
2 months ago.
yeah, this is not recent information. This is a couple of months back when he determined this. So I wasn't sure how much you had heard, but I wanted you to understand that also that was only the first 5 rows of Section A that he has found those in. And so he's thinking there's probably over 100 spaces available.
So
in Section A.
we thought everything was sold out. Presumably, we know who the buyers were. We've lost contact with many of the buyers. Are we sure that these aren't spots that somebody's not going to come forward 3 years from now after we've sold it to someone else?
I think he's concluded that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think they were spots that we didn't know existed.
They didn't have a precise layout for Section A, it being the oldest part of the cemetery.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, we have a map that shows it in grave sites that are probably all uniform on the map.
Right.
But in reality, there's spaces between those burial plots, those burial sites.
So is he using radar technology to discover where the caskets actually are?
I think he's going by
Or he's
headstones.
just hoping that the headstone actually.
I mean, we
lines
have a
up with the
record
casket.
of who's buried in which, and they're matching that up with what's on the ground out there, the headstones, and
Okay.
With the flood debris in that area, I'm not sure that you'd want to see what's under there in other places, right?
I thought that was down in the other
Yeah.
area.
Well, just the cemetery in general. I don't know that you'd want to survey. You'd find some things you probably wouldn't want to.
So I'll get Bruce back here for another meeting, and we can talk at that time too about, well, we want to talk about maybe some tweaking of the policies related to the existing cemetery. As we use these spaces, we may want to make them ground level monuments, because as we sell these spaces in between, it's going to make it increasingly more difficult to get equipment in.
Yeah.
So that was going to be part of the discussion tonight too, but we'll have that later at another time. As well as the idea of a second cemetery, and do you want to take a field trip to some spots that we could potentially consider? Then you can give us direction as to whether you want us to pursue a cost analysis of that kind of thing.
Well, the other thing that I think that needs to be discussed is this the business a business we should be in? And I don't even know that I'm absolutely certain what I believe, but I know that that the last time we talked about it, there was some question in people's minds. So I think whether we do it tonight or whether we do it at a different time, that discussion and a decision as to what our commitment is, and to some degree the commitment is dependent on the cost.
Yeah.
But that has to take place.
Right.
I agree with you. And just for the seeding that discussion in the future, I was very much not in favor of necessarily continuing cemetery services as a city service, but it was pointed out to me that where the state regulates the disposition of human remains, and you can't bury someone in your backyard, you are required to, there are laws associated with it. If we are having those sort of restrictions, then as a city, we have to provide a facility for people to be law-abiding. So it goes the other direction. That's something that would be worth considering. But we don't need a motion to table this since there's no action. We can just move on, right?
Without objection, we'll put it back on. And
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. All right, let's go to item 5, Mayor's Report. And I like how we're taking the show on the road. You know, some time ago I said we need to take government to the people, and we're talking about doing that with all these field trips, so taking it on the road. So I have 4 or 5 items, just briefly, because I've been concerned with people filing their taxes by April 17th. So, but I have been in touch with the 4th of July committee, and they're doing a bang-up job, the Dwayne and Laura Tony and their committee. I had second counselor or first counselor in the LDS stake presidency contact me that they're putting together a children's float for their stake, and we got them connected there. And I have not was not able to make their meeting. I know they have 2 more. One of them I have a conflict with the mayors, with the meetings down in St. George, but I'm staying in contact, and their committee's doing a great job. And we're looking forward to another great event this year. I did sign the form to do the flyover, so that's required that we request that and that I sign that. So that's always a highlight that everyone looks forward to. So that's going along well. As many of you may recall, a few weeks ago we had that pipe break, and I had asked that Randy get me a report on that, and he did get a report to me. I have just recently got it late last week. I've not had a chance to go through it.
I think I sent it to everybody.
Did y'all see it? Okay, I didn't notice that. But that's one, Steve, when we talked, that I'd requested, can we get a report on the findings of that and what was affected? And I had gone up to that when it had taken place, and Randy had shown me around, and so y'all have that, so that's great. And other than that, I've been meeting. I try to meet with residents if they want to speak with me after my meeting with Steve, and I've met with a couple of building owners and potential building owners that have wanted to talk to me. And I can report on that further later. And then budget season's coming up, so I was working Steve today. Let's carve out a lot of money for reserves, because I'm one that doesn't like being strapped for money. I'd like to have some available. Steve, I'm putting some pressure on you. And then my last thing, did I cover everything else? Is that this is kind of more of Mayor's editorial based on all our discussion tonight. And my biggest concern is on that trail up there is that we be concerned about the citizens downhill. That we don't want any sort of slide or any type of thing like you had over in North Salt Lake, where it's going down into homes. And so that's the biggest concern I get. I was disappointed, I got to say, as a citizen, but I realize as a grown-up adult mayor that we need to make sure everybody's safety is taken into place. Recreational use, I think, is a great use for it, but I hope we proceed with good caution and care, and that that the Trails the committee could be that have been their own worst enemy here, coming to us with this. But at the same time, it's, I think, awaken the sleeping giant of things that need to take place up there. So that's my big concern. As I was up there the other week and last week, that we make sure that we don't have a big slide coming down in the homes. And so that is my mayor's report. I did not have any in the last 2 weeks, any council of government meetings, any UIA meetings, any fire board meetings. I did run into the fire chief, and they had a busy night last night, but fortunately it was not anything in our city. It was in Woods Cross and in the county. But I do have a UIA meeting coming up Monday, which has been postponed to a week from Monday, so I'll report on that at that time. So unless you have any questions for me, we'll move on to number 6, the city manager's report.
And Kevin took care of that for me, so I don't have anything, Mayor.
Okay.
I was just going to bring up one item.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. There was an item,
That's
Lisa.
okay.
I'm glad you reminded me.
We were so glad you
Steve
spoke up, because we hadn't heard from you
delegating
tonight.
time on the city manager's agenda for me.
That's right. Thank you.
I just wanted to, I guess everyone here knows that some buildings are going up for sale and someone's purchasing them. Is that
I don't think
public
the council
information?
knows that yet.
That's kind of what I referred to. I met with a couple building owners, but
Yeah,
I
I don't
didn't
know if it's
know.
public. So
anyway, you had that
Anyway,
discussion today with them. So.
we have some governing documents that apply to the property, and we just heard maybe last week, and I was contacted on Friday by their attorney, saying, hey, we're closing next week, can we meet with you and Steve? So we met. In my opinion, they need to do an assignment and assumption agreement, which last time we did as part of closing, which is, in my opinion, the legally optimal way to do it, because both parties are there, they sign it, the assignment and assumption is recorded immediately, nothing can happen to the title work in between, but we've been notified that they're closing tomorrow. So one option is to have the council and the RDA, both bodies, have to approve or authorize the mayor to enter into this assignment and assumption agreement. If you're not comfortable giving the mayor that authority tonight, because I've trained you well,
We met with their attorney just today, by the way.
But so do we need a
And learned that
closed
the closing's
meeting
tomorrow.
so that we
What buildings are
can
we-
get
what
a
are we
little more
talking?
information?
What buildings are we talking about?
it's in the parish gateway plan area.
Can you tell us what?
Maybe we should have a
property it
closed
is?
meeting.
Well, I guess I leave it
Over
up to
the-
the mayor and Steve as to whether this is public information yet or not.
I don't think it is, but there's some parties that think it is, so.
Well, then I would probably, at this point, if we're talking about a privileged matter, or need to, because you're asking for a decision from the council and then the RDA by extension, then we should probably
closed
adjourn to
meeting.
a closed meeting.
Agreed.
I think so.
Or I could just say, I mean, I don't know.
Just in
To be on the safe side, I
deference for
think.
the
Yeah,
property
in
owners, I would say that a motion that we adjourn to a closed meeting without the intent to return to the city council, but to convene an RDA when we come out of closed meeting.
Second.
Round the tables back there.
I like that. So is that a motion, a second, to adjourn to a
Yes.
closed meeting and close the city council meeting for tonight, to then go directly into the RDA meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
After a break.
Okay. After a break. Do I need my gavel for
This
this
is a
one?
hazard
Still
training.
open, so.
Do we need to vote?
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
So Avalon, we'll need a separate tape for the closed meeting.